Hi, my name's Sam, and this video is a rebuttal of the Ray Comfort video, The Atheist Delusion, which you may or may not be familiar with. Basically, some time ago, I accepted a challenge from a Christian to watch this video. It's taken a little while. I've now watched the video, and this is my response to it and the issues that it raises. So firstly, and very briefly, just a little background about me, which I only say so that you can understand the viewpoint I'm coming at this from. So I was a Christian in my teenage years. Ultimately, I abandoned my faith in my early 20s. And it wasn't through any grand revelation or anything like that. It was a gradual understanding of what I eventually decided were the shaky foundations that my faith was built on. And it ultimately came down to it just being blind faith. And I didn't think that was a good enough reason to keep believing in it. Now, I now consider myself to be an atheist, in that while I don't completely rule out the possibility of there being a supreme being, I consider this to be, well, firstly, extremely unlikely, and I also see that no evidence at all for there being a supreme being, or that it has any influence whatsoever on the universe. But that said, it's really important at this stage to say unequivocally that I have nothing but respect for Christians and people of all religions. I have several friends and family members who are religious. I do not think that their faith is stupid or anything like that. I completely respect their views and their right to have them. But if someone tries to prove what I believe is wrong, as the Atheist Delusion does, I'm going to argue my case. And that's what I'm going to do here. Right, so on to my thoughts about the Atheist Delusion movie. Well, ultimately, it really only presents one argument, which I'll come to later on. But it draws that argument out over pretty much about 45 minutes of the 1 hour movie before wrapping up. So on this video, I'm just going to summarize the points that the Atheist Delusion movie tries to put across and explain why I think that they're deeply flawed. My video is primarily aimed at people who've already watched the Atheist Delusion and want a bit more information on the validity of the arguments that are used in it. If you've not watched the movie, then you are welcome to do so if you want, but, well, to be totally honest, I can't really recommend it because I think its argument has more holes in it like Colander does. So the first thing to point out about this video is that its star, so to speak, the interviewer, the man who's rarely on camera but is effectively conducting things, is a man named Ray Comfort. You may have heard of. He's quite infamous in these circles, I have to say. First, it's really important to note that he is a creationist. So that means he believes that the earth and everything in it were created in 7 days, like it says in Genesis, and that he also believes evolution is a myth. Now, I'll address this properly later on, but just now I should point out that he is pushing a view that even the vast majority of Christians do not agree with. But that's not the real reason Ray Comfort is particularly infamous. It's for a video that he made in 2006, I believe, when he claimed that the banana was, in his words, the atheist's nightmare, and went on to say the way it fits so well in the hand, as outside indicators of quality and things like that, were proof that it was designed by God. Yes, he did actually say this, I know. But, of course, all he actually managed to do by saying this was annihilate his own case, as the banana as we know it is actually an example of evolution, as it's been deliberately engineered over thousands of years by humans to what we have today. Whereas if you find a natural banana, it looks nothing like what we would think of as a banana, and, perhaps most importantly, it tastes disgusting. And that's just a flavour of some of the nonsense that Ray Comfort puts forward as evidence for his God. Now, I also want to very briefly address the ridiculous assertion in the description of this video, which starts, having to prove the existence of God to an atheist is like having to prove the existence of the sun at noon on a clear day. Now, that's about as bad an analogy as you can get for two very obvious reasons. And firstly, it's because there's not a sane person alive who would deny the existence of the sun, whereas there are patently, whether you believe it or not, there are millions who do not believe in a God. That is a fact. And the second reason is because even if you didn't believe, so to speak, in the sun, it's extremely easy for a scientist to prove its existence, whereas it is impossible to prove the existence of God. I would also note that a description like this is likely to get an atheist back up immediately, and as anyone who has ever debated with anyone on any topic before will know that if you insult your opponent's intelligence at the start, it's pretty much the worst way to convince them that your argument is correct. That just makes me immediately think that this movie was made more to appeal to creationists like Ray Comfort and reinforce their views than it was to try and convince atheists that they're wrong. Okay, so now the movie itself, for those who haven't seen it, it basically involves Ray Comfort going around a university campus interviewing students who self-identify as atheists and then putting his argument to them. And this is interspersed frequently with shots of natural wonder, like the sort of things you'd get in a David Attenborough documentary, for example. So one thing that quickly becomes clear is that the interviews that Ray Comfort conducts are heavily edited. Now, one, he's obviously entitled to cut out what he wants, particularly parts that are relevant. There are several instances where it does appear a portion of an answer has been cherry-picked to make it look like he won. Now, this does not seem like a trustworthy approach and instantly makes you wonder what happened in the full conversations. And what makes this worse is that pretty much everyone he talks to in the video is a young student who, well, and they all identify as atheists, but from the way they speak, it's quite clear they haven't really given any proper thought to their beliefs, as they're largely incapable of answering what I would say are some pretty basic questions and assertions, which are very easy to refute, actually, if you think about it. The way that the video is edited to also gives the impression that Ray spent quite a while cherry-picking the subjects who gave the worst answers, and those are the ones he obviously used in his movie. And it would be interesting to see if he released the interviews he conducted in full, if many of them consisted of him being totally dismantled by people who knew what they were talking about, but that he's chosen to cut that out of the movie because obviously it doesn't help his argument. I don't know that. That might be totally false, but that is fairly likely, I would suggest. The only actual expert that he debates with on the video is a theoretical physicist called Lawrence Krauss, who completely rubbishes Comfort's argument in the small section of their interview that's included. I think it would be very hard, certainly for anyone who isn't coming at it from Comfort's point of view to start with, could watch that segment and think that Comfort won. It's also important to point out that Comfort's interviewing technique appears to be asking very leading questions and not giving his subjects a proper chance to count what he's saying and turn the burden of proof back onto him. Now, that doesn't allow him to show critical thinking, and again, it makes it seem like he's deliberately misleading the audience. Now, I would also say at this point that Ray Comfort is regularly asking these young students to explain pretty complex science, and then when they can't, he's then using that as proof against them that the God he believes in, that specific God, he exists. This is extremely unfair, because the fact that one person doesn't know the science behind something does not mean that that science is not true. For example, I don't know what the specific law is which lets me drive a car in the UK, where I live, but I know for a fact that I am allowed to do so. I passed my driving test, I have my driving license, I can drive the car. It is irrelevant whether I know the law or not. It is a fact. Likewise, an 18-year-old student might not be able to explain how natural selection works, but that doesn't mean it isn't true. It's also very important to know that it isn't a problem for an atheist to answer a question about something like how the universe came to being with the answer, I don't know. It is not a weakness to admit that science hasn't yet provided all the answers, and it in no way helps make the case for God. Anyone who thinks otherwise is committing what's known commonly as a black and white fallacy. Now, that's basically when you're presenting two possibilities as being the only ones, when that clearly isn't the case. So in the movie, Ray Comfort does this when he's effectively saying that he doesn't believe in the Big Bang Theory, therefore the existence of his particular God is proven. Now, this reasoning is nonsensical, because there are literally billions of different possibilities for how the universe came into being, including all the thousands of different religions' views on this. So even if the Big Bang Theory were not true, that would in no way prove that Christianity, or any other religion for that matter, were true. In fact, the burden of proof for extraordinary claims, like the existence of God, must always rest with the person making the extraordinary claim. Otherwise, I could, for example, state that I believe that natural disasters on Earth were caused by a giant rabbit in a faraway galaxy twitching its ears, which is ridiculous, by the way, but when I was asked to prove it, why I thought basically that was what happened, all I would need to do was respond by saying, well, I don't need to prove it, you need to disprove it, otherwise it's true. Now, I'm sure you can see how ridiculous that argument is, but it is honestly no different from saying that not being able to prove that God didn't create the universe means that God definitely did create the universe. It's literally the same. Right, so in this segment of the video, Ray Comfort is also misrepresenting atheism, and he is failing to acknowledge that not all atheists have the same beliefs. For example, he asked one of his subjects fairly early on if he believes that, in his words, everything was created from nothing, and he asserts that that's what atheists believe. Well, an atheist is defined as someone who does not believe in a God. That is it. That is the definition of atheism, of an atheist, sorry. They don't have to follow logic or agree with science or subscribe to commonly held scientific theories or anything like that. And it is disingenuous of Ray Comfort to imply that they all do. They're all different. Right, with that all said, I think it's important now that I've actually tackled the meat of what Ray Comfort's argument is. What's described in the description is something like the one scientific question that dismantles atheism, or something along those lines. So I was waiting for this to be something that was quite thought-provoking, new, something that would actually really require me to think hard about what he was saying and whether it might be true. So actually, to be honest, I was quite disappointed when it turned out that literally the entire thing is based on one of the oldest and the most widely refuted so-called proofs of a god, and it's called the watchmaker argument. So if you haven't heard of the watchmaker argument, its premise is basically that you're walking through a field and you saw a watch lying on the ground, you would instantly recognize it as something that was made by a creator because of its complexity. Well, the argument then goes on that because nature and the universe is so infinitely complex itself, that it too must have a creator. Now, this is a centuries-old argument, and the only real difference in the original that Comfort is presenting in his video is that he uses an analogy of a book instead of a watch, but effectively it is the same argument. In the video, he gives his subjects a book to flick through. He asks them if they think it could just sort of come about by accident, or whether it had to have a creator. And of course they say it had to have a creator, that's obvious. Then he then goes on to draw a comparison between that and DNA, which he of course goes and calls the Book of Life, for comparison's sake, for fairly obvious reasons, and therefore asserts that surely it too had to have a creator. Okay, but there are many, many problems with this argument. The first one to point out is that we cannot say that because two things are alike in one respect, it necessarily follows that they are alike in others. In fact, when you think about that, it's actually a totally ludicrous concept. So, for example, the watchmaker argument is no different from me saying cats are animals. Cats have 4 legs. It's by fact. Spiders are also animals. Therefore, it must follow that spiders also have 4 legs. Or if we go on the watch theme, I could say the watch is complex. The watch can be strapped to my wrist. The universe is also complex. Therefore, the universe can also be strapped to my wrist. You see what I mean? This alone shows how terrible the watchmaker argument, or Comfort's bookmaker version, is. But it is hardly the only flaw with the argument. I also need to point out that the very reason we instantly recognise that the watch had a creator is not because it's complex. It's because we already know that it is a watch, and we know that it is man-made, because every single watch we have ever known has had a creator. And that is the complete opposite of the natural world, where we've never seen an external, intelligent designer create a living being. It's always been the other way around. So, on that note, the watchmaker argument also completely ignores evolution by natural selection, and let's be honest, that's hardly surprising given that Comfort is a creationist, that he's used that argument. But natural selection has been clearly shown to have created billions of intelligent designs by itself, and without any external intelligent creator deliberately designing them as such. These arguments by themselves are more than enough to defeat the watchmaker argument, but as it is the complete crux of Comfort's argument in this movie, I feel I also need to quickly point out some other major flaws with it. One of these is, I think, a particularly big problem, in that the watchmaker argument actually defeats itself through its own reasoning. So it does this because if you were to follow its conclusion that complexity needs a designer, and so the universe has a designer, okay, then it must follow that because the designer himself must have been complex, they too had to have a designer, a creator of the creator, so to speak. And then you'd also have, that would therefore follow too, that the designer of the designer was of course themselves complex. So there must have been a designer of the designer of the designer, and so on forever. So effectively, this argument is saying that because the universe is so remarkable, it couldn't have happened by chance, but instead was created by some being that themselves was even more remarkable. And so surely, by that same logic, they could also not have happened by chance. It's the only way that a proponent of the watchmaker argument can attempt to get around this problem is by using what's known as special pleading to say that their God is exempt from the rule, which, by the way, they just stated was an unchangeable certainty, and they say that without justifying it. And ultimately, special pleading like this is effectively blind faith. There's no possible logical explanation for it. Now, yet another issue with the watchmaker analogy is that even if all these major flaws of it didn't exist, and they do, it would still not prove the Christian God. All it would prove is that a supreme being or beings created the universe. It would not prove that any single religion's gods were correct, or anything about any of that religion's teachings at all. And the last argument against the watchmaker that I'm going to use, there are lots more, but it's the last one I'm going to focus on, is that even if all what I've just said was rubbish, and that it proved that God existed, which it doesn't, it would actually prove, though, that the specific Abrahamic God of the Bible, the Christian God, doesn't exist. Now, the reason for that is the same reason behind the Epicurean paradox, which you've probably heard of. It's one of the strongest refutations around against the existence of the Abrahamic God. Now, the original Epicurean paradox uses evil as an example, and that's what you see in its purest form. But because we're discussing the watchmaker argument, I'm going to replace evil in this case with design. It works the same in this case. So the Abrahamic God of the Bible is both all-powerful and all-loving and the creator of all things. The Bible says these things as absolutes. However, we know for a fact that people are born every day around the world with birth defects or conditions like Down syndrome, things like that. They're all clearly examples of imperfect design. There's absolutely no question about that. So therefore, if Comfort asserts that all DNA and living creatures were created by God, it is an impossibility for him to be both all-powerful and all-loving, or else these defects and conditions would not exist. And therefore it must logically follow that God is either a poor designer or he is evil, or both. Now, Comfort falls into this trap again later in the video when he says that all the plants that grow naturally that we can eat are evidence that God created them for us to eat. The problem with that, it's ludicrous actually, because he completely ignores all the thousands of plants that also grow naturally, which are inedible or in many cases deadly poisonous. So again, if the Abrahamic God of the Bible exists, he either designed them that way by mistake, or he deliberately put them there to catch us out and is therefore evil. So overall, the watchmaker argument is crushingly flawed in multiple ways. In fact, it seems at times in the video that Comfort perhaps realizes that, as his argument often focuses on an attempted appeal to people's emotions, and that's regularly backed up by really beautiful images of the natural world, sort of appeal to wonder almost. He's basically saying that we should wonder at this amazing world that we live in, and because it's so amazing, it must have been created by God. But appeals to emotion don't work logically, because they're basically predicated on trying to make you want to believe something rather than showing you why you should believe something. Now, to show you how poor an argument is, I wanted England to win the World Cup this summer. But even if that had made me believe that they would win the World Cup, that belief did not make it true. You can't make something real just because you want it to be real. Now, another argument that Comfort brings up in his movie is using one of the most famous questions ever posed, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Now, the problem with him asking this question seriously is that he's doing it in an attempt to try and get around evolution by natural selection because he doesn't believe in it. Now, I think it's very important to point out here that some creationists will try to discredit evolution by saying that it's only a theory. You hear that a lot. And then they try and say that because of that, it's not been proven to be true. Now, I'm afraid this shows a complete lack of knowledge of what a scientific theory actually is. If it were a theory in the more colloquial sense that you'd use just in everyday speech about other things, what the word theory would mean, you'd refer to it in a scientific term as a hypothesis, not a theory, because a scientific theory is a well-substantiated even explanation of an aspect of the world based on a body of facts that have been repeatedly confirmed through observation and experiment. It is not a guess, it is entirely reliable. And this is literally what the definition of a scientific theory is. Now, evolution by natural selection is real and has been shown to take place. So the chicken-egg argument is nonsense, given the chicken evolved from an early creature, which in turn evolved from an early creature, and so on. Now, in the same segment of the video, Comfort makes the assertion that we don't see any part-evolved animals in the world today. Now, this goes unchallenged in the video, but he is completely and utterly wrong about this. Evolution is not a time-limited process. It is and forever will be constant. It is constantly going on. Literally, every living organism on this planet right now is part-evolved and is in the process of evolving. Now, I could spend hours and hours talking about evolution, but frankly, I'm not going to waste your time. The vast majority of both atheists and religious people accept it as true. Now, if you do have any doubts, there are many good videos out there that explain to you far better than me that it's true. I'd particularly recommend the YouTube channel Rationality Rules. The guy who presents that. He's very good at setting out arguments step by step in a way that's quite easy to follow. But there's lots of others out there also who are similarly extremely good. Now, that pretty much covers the main chunk of the movie. But there's 15 minutes or so at the end where Comfort basically starts attacking his subjects as being immoral, saying they need to repent for their sins and turn to Christ. Yeah, I know, he literally does that. Firstly, I'd say he approaches this in a remarkably rude and tactless way. As we've already said earlier in the video, insulting people is not a good way to make them change their mind. Now, he also commits the extremely old fallacy of painting atheists as a bunch of immoral hedonists who only abandon religion so they can live guilt-free lives of self-serving pleasure-seeking, basically. Now, not only is this incredibly insulting, but it's wildly inaccurate. Now, well, as I've discussed earlier, all atheists hold different beliefs on many subjects and only share a common belief that there is no God or gods. All atheists that I know or have ever come across are atheists or became atheists because they reached a conclusion through logic that there is no supreme being. Now, while it's possible that some atheists exist that do fit Comfort's description, I certainly have not met any, and I would be stunned if they were anything but a minuscule minority of the atheist population at large. In fact, there have actually been some studies that have shown that statistically, atheists are more unlikely than religious people to commit certain immoral acts, such as, for example, cheating on their partner. And that completely goes against this outdated hedonistic narrative about atheists. Now, contrary to this nonsense view, atheists have morals, and these morals are not, as again is sometimes falsely asserted, drawn from the Bible. Yes, atheists on the whole share many morals with those that are taught in the Bible, but we cannot look at the Bible as a basis for all morality in Western society when it literally promotes slavery and other such concepts which are considered abhorrent in today's society. Now, we can't just cherry pick the morals that we still like from the Bible while ignoring the ones we don't like and say that the Bible is the moral code by which we live our lives. Because what we're doing by that is we're using something else, a rational part of our brains, to establish what we consider to be right and what we consider to be wrong. Now, ultimately, I'm afraid, if the only reason that you think it is wrong to murder, rape, or steal is because a book tells you not to, then you are a sociopath. This section also sees Comfort try to justify the existence and necessity of the Christian hell. Now, here he actually does get given one excellent answer in one of his subjects. And to be fair to Comfort, he did leave this in his video. And this guy says that if God made him, how could God blame him for his flaws? He says something like, it'd be like making a car and blaming the car when it doesn't work, which is a brilliant answer, to be honest. It makes you think of that excellent Spock quote on religion from the first Star Trek film. He says that God creates faulty humans and then blames them for his own mistakes. That's basically exactly what this guy was saying. Now, if God is indeed the creator of everything, that means he's also responsible for everything we do wrong, as that's the way he made us. And if that were the case, there's no true moral accountability at all. Now, one of the arguments that Comfort uses in this video for the necessity of hell is that he says it's needed to punish evil people, and he gives the example of Hitler, who deserved punishment for the awful crimes that they've committed. Now, hardly anyone would dispute that Hitler was anything other than a terrible person. This argument does highlight some more major flaws. So, for one, it is not only Hitler who would end up in hell, so would all the millions of innocent Jews that he had exterminated, because their crime, as Comfort would see it, of not believing in Jesus is seen as being just as bad as Hitler's genocide. Now, the Bible's definition of hell and who goes there is literally saying that all non-believers are as bad as Hitler. In fact, it's actually even worse than that, because Hitler would need only have repented his sins and turned to Christ just before he killed himself, and he would have ended up in heaven, despite all the terrible things he did on earth. While virtuous non-believers or followers of other religions, like someone like Gandhi, they would end up in hell. And also, the punishment for any finite crime, even ones as bad as Hitler's, that is carried out on earth, is an eternal one. And that goes against all our principles of the punishment fitting the crime. It isn't fair. What is crystal clear here is that this vision of hell has absolutely nothing to do with fairness and justice. The only saving grace here is that there is literally zero evidence that hell exists, or for that matter, that heaven exists. And on the subject of heaven, it is always portrayed as eternal life in the presence of God. That's its definition. But let's actually think about that for a second. Eternal life, literally living forever. Actually think about that for a moment. How terrifying does that sound? Think about existing forever with no driving force, no motivation, just an endless being. Well, that is not heaven. That is hell. The only thing which gives life meaning and purpose is the absolute certainty of death, that one day will end. That is the sole driver to ever achieve anything. Otherwise, if you had eternity to do something, why would you ever do it today? We're told to long for eternal life, but I, for one, don't want it. I can't think of anything worse than existing forever with no sense of purpose, no reason for existence, and no way to stop it. Can you? Right, that pretty much covers all the key points of the movie, but I've just got two final things to bring up. Firstly, later on, Comfort makes the throwaway comment, "I'm a Christian, I'm not filled with hate like some religions." Now, this is the pot calling the kettle black if ever I've heard it, because Christianity has absolutely no claim to moral high ground compared to any other religions. Atrocities have been committed in the names of all major religions. There are huge numbers of Christians who are filled with hate, just as there are huge numbers of Muslims that are, huge numbers of Jews that are, and for that matter, huge numbers of atheists who are. There are even more, though, in all of these belief systems that are filled with love. Now, secondly, the movie ends with an attempt by Comfort and his pals, basically, to peddle some sort of DVD conversion kit so that other creationists can too show atheists the foolishness of their beliefs. Now, I'm sorry, but this just confirms what I said, I believed, earlier on about this movie, that it was not really aimed at converting atheists who watched it, but is actually aimed at creationists and reassuring them and getting some cash off them as well. So, well, if Comfort wants to do that, then this is right, but it does make me and anyone else watching this movie with an open mind question what his motives were for it. Okay, so thanks for putting up with my ramblings. I hope that's made some sense to you. As you can see, the movie has not made me change my mind, and personally, I'd be surprised if it's been remotely effective in convincing any other atheists who watched it to do so either. Now, if you've got any questions or feedback, please do leave me a comment. I'll be more than happy to discuss my opinions in any way. And also, and I really can't overstate this, please do not just take my word as being true. Think about these things for yourselves, come to your own conclusions, because blindly accepting things we're told without thinking them through has led to so much of what is wrong with the world today. Okay, so farewell, fellow truth seekers, and thanks for watching.